Welcome to this explainer. You know, if you've ever stopped and wondered just how the natural world actually balances itself out, or maybe why certain environmental issues seem to be spiraling out of control lately, well, you are exactly in the right place. Today, we're going to dive deep into the fundamental rules of life itself and figure out exactly where we fit into the whole shebang.
Because honestly, in nature, absolutely nothing exists in isolation. Seriously, every single tree, every predator roaming around, every tiny stream, and even those microscopic organisms you can't even see, they are all deeply, inextricably linked in this massive living web. But before we can even begin to grasp the sheer scale of the environmental challenges we're facing today, we kind of need to understand the underlying mathematical rules that govern all this beautiful chaos.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the biological foundations of the web of life, explore the rules of population growth, and then look at nature's limiting factors. After that, we'll pivot over to the human story, looking at our population boom, our ecological footprint, and how all of this culminates in some pretty major global environmental crises.
All right, let's just dive right in with Chapter 1, the web of life, where we define the rules of our environment.
Okay, so before we can really dig into global crises, we have to establish our baseline, right? And that baseline is ecology. Ecology is literally the scientific study of the relationships between organisms and their environment. It examines exactly how living things interact with each other and with their physical surroundings. Think of ecology as basically the ultimate instruction manual for Earth. It gives us the essential framework we need to make sense of every single environmental challenge and conservation strategy that we'll be talking about later on.
Now, within ecology, one of the most absolutely critical concepts to get a handle on is the population. A population is simply a group of organisms of the exact same species living in the same area at the exact same time. But here's the thing, a population isn't just a simple head count. Scientists actually track specific characteristics to figure out if a species is thriving or if it's struggling. They look at things like size and density, distribution patterns, and overall growth rate. And that growth rate, well, it's basically a constant tug of war. You've got births and immigration adding to the population on one side versus deaths and emigration subtracting from it on the other.
And that little tug-of-war brings us directly to Chapter 2, Rules of Population Growth, where we'll be understanding exponential versus logistic models.
So it turns out there are two distinct ways populations actually grow in nature. First up, we have exponential growth. Picture a steep, J-shaped curve. This happens when a population has completely unlimited resources, which leads to incredibly rapid initial growth. But the catch? Yeah, it is totally unsustainable in the real world. Then, on the flip side, we have the reality check, logistic growth. This is an S-shaped curve. As resources inevitably become scarce, the growth slows way down, eventually stabilizing at the environment's maximum carrying capacity, meaning the absolute maximum number of individuals that environment can actually support.
So what exactly forces that runaway J-shaped curve to finally flatten out into that stable S-shaped curve? Well, that brings us to Chapter 3, Nature's Limiting Factors. What keeps growth in check?
You see, nature has very strict physical boundaries that act kind of like invisible fences, keeping population growth totally in check. We call these things limiting factors. Put simply, any ecosystem only has so much food, so much fresh water, and literally so much physical space to go around. And beyond those basic resources, natural populations are also restricted by predators hunting them down and diseases naturally thinning out their numbers.
We actually categorize these constraints, starting with what we call density-dependent factors. These are limits whose impact actually gets stronger as the population size gets bigger. Just imagine a really densely packed forest where deer have gotten totally overpopulated. The competition for the few remaining edible plants becomes absolutely fierce. Plus, in those crowded conditions, contagious diseases spread like wildfire. Basically, the denser the population gets, the harder these factors push back to bring those numbers down.
Now, contrast that with density-independent factors. These are basically nature's wildcards. These factors will drastically reduce a population regardless of whether there are 10 individuals or 10,000. We're talking about extreme weather events, massive floods, devastating wildfires, sudden natural disasters like that. Nature really doesn't care how dense the population is when a hurricane hits, right? The carrying capacity of the environment is just instantly reset, regardless.
All right, now that we've laid down the strict, supposedly unbreakable rules of nature, it's time for the major plot twist of this explainer. Chapter 4, The Human Population Boom, a Species Breaking the Rules. As a species, we humans have somehow seemingly found a way to just completely bypass nature's limiting factors. Get this, in 2022, the global human population officially surpassed 8 billion people. 8 billion! Through massive advancements in agriculture, medicine, and technology, we have continually raised our own carrying capacity. But that's created an immense, completely unprecedented global demand for food, agricultural land, fresh water, and fossil fuels.
And it's not even just that total number that's so staggering, it's the speed of it all. Our population's doubling time is now under 50 years. Think about that. It took literally hundreds of thousands of years for humans to reach our very first billion. And now we're living right in the middle of a staggering, runaway phase of exponential J-shaped growth. But this rapid expansion isn't exactly happening evenly across the board. The vast majority of current human population growth is actually occurring in developing countries. And this geographical imbalance means that surging populations are putting intense, heavy pressure on regions where basic infrastructure and resources, things like reliable access to food, clean water, healthcare, and energy, are already stretched incredibly thin. So, to truly grasp the impact of 8 billion people wandering the Earth, we need a way to measure it. That leads us straight into Chapter 5, our ecological footprint, living beyond our planet's means. Try to think of Earth as a giant bank account. But instead of money, the currency here is land, water, and energy. Your ecological footprint is exactly how much of that Earth currency you are spending. It's defined as the total area of biologically productive land and water required to produce everything you consume: your food, your housing, your transport. And, just as importantly, it includes the area required to absorb all the waste and carbon emissions you generate doing it. And when you actually sit down and break down the planetary math, it's pretty eye-opening. The Earth can naturally provide about 1.7 global hectares per person, but currently, the average human is demanding about 2.7 global hectares, which means our planetary bank account is deeply, deeply overdrawn. We are spending resources way, way faster than the Earth can naturally regenerate them. And just as the population growth is geographically uneven, so is the resource consumption. The numbers show that developed nations consume 5 to 10 times more resources per person than developing nations. So this means the heavy resource deficit that's driving our ecological overshoot is strongly linked to the high consumption lifestyles of developed nations. It creates a deeply, deeply unequal burden on the Earth's ecosystems. Naturally, when a species overdraws its ecological bank account on a truly global scale, there are going to be some severe, macro-level consequences. And that brings us to our final chapter, Global Environmental Crises, the consequences of our impact.
For sure, the most prominent, unavoidable consequence of our massive ecological footprint is climate change. By aggressively burning fossil fuels to sustain this exponential growth, we are pumping massive, unbelievable amounts of CO2 right into the atmosphere. And this isn't just warming the planet up a bit, it's fundamentally altering global weather systems. It's leading to much more intensified, destructive storms, prolonged droughts, and rising sea levels that are threatening coastal communities all over the world. Simultaneously, our massive industrial processes and the literal millions of vehicles we rely on every single day are just continuously releasing harmful particulates and toxic gases into the air. This severe air pollution actually does direct, measurable damage to human respiratory health globally. Plus, it interacts with the atmosphere to create acid rain, which in turn falls down and poisons our soils and forests.
And the crisis extends deeply into our waterways, too. Just think about the immense agricultural operations required to feed 8 billion people. They result in chemical runoff that literally creates massive dead zones in our oceans. Throw in industrial waste and the pervasive, everywhere-you-look spread of plastic contamination, and we are rapidly degrading the very aquatic ecosystems that provide the foundation for global biodiversity, not to mention our own essential water security.
We started out today by looking at the supposedly unbreakable rules of ecology, how populations grow, hit their limits, and then stabilize. We humans have used technology and fossil fuels to temporarily push those natural limits away, triggering an unprecedented population boom and a massive ecological footprint. But looking at all these mounting environmental crises around us, from climate change to severe global pollution, I want to leave you with this one question to really ponder. Have human beings truly bypassed Earth's carrying capacity for good, or are we simply delaying a very harsh, completely inevitable shift from an exponential J-curve to a restricted logistic S-curve? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I highly encourage you to dive even deeper into the science of our incredible planet.